Hello and welcome to the Empower Couples podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is titled, Husbands Are Facing This Inner Challenge and It's Affecting Marriages.
Now, there are a lot of new listeners, so you might be wondering, well, how do you know what husbands are dealing with? What is this inner challenge and how would you know? Well, we are lucky enough and fortunate enough to talk to couples all day, every day in our private sessions. And these are good people who work hard, who want the best for their family. And we just get to see the insider experience of what couples deal with. And in a sense, like pull up the hood, look beneath the surface as to what is going on. And I'm really excited for Aaron to dive in and even express this, because this is something he really has noticed in men especially. And I think so many of you are going to relate to it.
And a part of that is because I recognize it within myself and my own experience. So it really resonates when I see or hear this from other men. So let me give you the picture here. In personal development, I think for a lot of us men, we start down the route of the motivational videos. For me on YouTube, and they're usually the ones for motivation to work out. And I've gotten myself back around to that just because I like to change up what I listen to and like how I'm motivated. And as I was listening to this, this dynamic we're going to talk about today really showed up in my own experience and as well as with the husbands from the past week. Now, in these videos, the theme is that no one is going to outwork you. You're going to grind when people are sleeping. You're going to wake up at 4 a.m. You need to be so good to be undeniable. You're going to prove your haters wrong, anyone that doubts you. And you'll get a lot of audio clips from, say, like Mike Tyson, or references to Muhammad Ali, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then other just business titans. So this is the message to men. And a part of it I know is true. There is this way of being that men need to adopt to face the outside world. And that message really is to be a warrior. A lot of common messages you hear around this theme also is to be a lion.
Be
or
tough.
That lions do not concern themselves with the opinions of sheep. That there's been different years. I know that's come back around, and I feel like that's coming back around now. So do I feel this is a certain mentality that men need to adopt in facing life and in what it means to be a leader for the family? Yes, I do. Now, to be a warrior, but there's this line to then, but it doesn't mean you're forceful. You trample over others with like no regard to how you impact them. It's not that you're climbing the ladder and stepping on people's heads and you're comparing and you're out to just beat anyone. And even that, I know there's a fine line. And it's that warrior mentality is that for men, you know what you stand for, right? So you know what you and your wife's and your family's values are, and you're going to stand for those out in the world. So it means that you're not going to comply. You're not just going to go along with things that you realize that are not aligned for you and your life. They're not aligned for the values you and your partner talk about. It's the direction that you want to head for the family. And in a sense, this is a part of what I feel it means to protect and defend your family, to be the leader in the outside world, and to stand on these commitments and these values, regardless of what shows up in your life, the challenges, the people. It's being not wavering, not quitting, being decisive, staying true. And all of that I do believe in. Now, again, there's that line, though, where you're not doing this at the negative impact of others. And what happens, however, is a number of things I want you to go into, but then there's an impact on the marriage because, again, there's the proper way to be a warrior.
Outside in the world.
Outside. And then there's how do you transition yourself back into the role as a partner, as a spouse. And many times that inside can expect from you to be then loving, to be understanding, understand your partner's experience, not take your partner's emotions being sourced or derived from, say, worry or concern that they have, not taking it personally, and then not as an attack on my character or even my ability, then like questioning or doubting my ability to be that warrior out in the world, right? So I can take some of your own, now I'm like kind of even pointing to Jocelyn, some worries and concerns and emotions you have. I can easily take that as, what, you don't think I'm doing the things necessary that I should to be a quote unquote man or warrior or lion, out in the world. So with that transition, it's like, well, I need to still give reassurance to my partner that, hey, we're on track. Like, I got this. We're aligned. We know what our vision is together. I'm outside holding that vision. I'm protecting. But while still being caring, not being defensive, not quick with my own reactions, not attacking you back, and being grounded and still accept the emotion that you have wherever you are, again, even if I don't necessarily agree. So that's it. Like, that's the picture that I see, and that's the internal conflict I myself experience at times. Now, my personality, just to be more honest, is not like if you're familiar with Enneagram, like, I'm not the achiever. I am the helper. Or if you want to go to any one of the personality tests.
More the people pleasing.
Yeah, I really am more of the agreeable person. So I don't necessarily have that like attack the world like at all costs and like I won't lose to anyone. But that is a stance that I need to adopt in my own personality. Yeah. All the things I mentioned, right? I can take a stand. I'm not going to comply. I'm going to hold that truth in my own life with whoever, family, friends, a cashier, signing financial documents, like whatever it is, and not be sort of forced to comply through pressure or stress. Yeah. But again, and I want to now transition to Jocelyn, if I don't make this transition properly, or I'm trying to be a warrior in a unaligned place, then it does have a big cost to the marriage.
Yeah, and we're going to break down more of that impact on the marriage, like exactly what we're hearing from the partners, as well as what can men do, right? Because we're talking about husbands specifically. I want to make a couple points. First off, because I know people hearing that description, they may assume we're talking about just arrangements where the male is the only one working. And actually, a lot of the couples that we work with, we'd have to really look at our documentation to see what percentage exactly. But in a lot of families, both partners are working. So this isn't just about the dynamic where there's like the stay-at-home mom and the husband's out in the world, right? This can still be happening when both people are working, which is the case for a lot of couples. Now, I was really thinking about this topic, and movies always come to mind because, number one, we love movies. And second, movies depict many different human experiences, societal norms, the culture at the time, and a few movies came to mind that really show a lot of the messaging towards men, and I think even some of the pressures and the impact. So a few, Wolf of Wall Street, by the way, if you haven't seen that, a really great movie. So Wolf of Wall Street, Jerry Maguire, and The Big Short. And all of these movies, and many more that we could list, they depict men so high performing, going out for success, make as much money as possible, work hard, don't have feelings too, right? Don't be emotional, be strong, keep going. And
even more than just strong, like attack and conquer, be a monster, be a lion. And that's kind of this mentality where, you kind of don't care about the impact on others, those that you're dealing with in the world. But then again, also part of it is, I feel, you let yourself get into this mode and then you're not responsible for either the shift back into the home, and you let that same kind of trait pattern show up with your partner.
Well, and you see in these movies, often their family life is not thriving, right? And it doesn't mean that they cancel each other out. There's absolutely dynamics where someone is high achieving, successful, has that more lion mentality, and then is able to successfully transition at home, which again, we're going to talk about ways to focus on this. But in these movies, you always see their family suffering. Their kids miss the parent. The wife is like, hey, why, what is this energy and why are you showing up this way? And conflict is happening.
And why you always gone? I don't feel like a priority.
And not just time too, but even the presence being home. I don't want to spoil what we're going to get to here next of what the partner's experience is, but it's like, okay, even when you're present physically, I'm not feeling the emotional or energetic presence. So it's not even all just the time away working. It can be about the experience then at home. And so just think about these movies. And I brought this up to one of the couples last week. I said, do you ever watch movies and you're like, oh, that's kind of my life? I reflected back to them what I'm noticing, and it's like a good point to just see, you know what? Am I playing out some of these norms? Am I going to be one of those examples of where you see the family and the partnership being sacrificed? Because this is one of the points I want to mention. There's a cost to every decision. Mm-hmm. And this is a mentality to really focus on in your life and in your marriage. There's a cost for every decision you make. And of course, there's a payoff, right? So even one that we brought up to a couple was like, look, there's a payoff for the job that you have, right? You make good money. You have this outwardly beautiful life. You're providing everything that you would want for your kids and for your wife. But what is
material,
yes.
safety, security, roof, food
yes.
standpoint?
But what is it costing you? And think about that for yourself in your own life. Any decision that you're making, there's a payoff and there's a cost. Sometimes the payoff outweighs the cost. We could get into some specifics, but sometimes actually the payoff makes sense. Even when couples are making decisions together about, hey, do we move here? Do we take this job? Do we put our kids in this kind of a school? Do we have our family involved in this kind of thing? Like many times the payoff is better than the cost, but in a lot of situations, what it's costing you is not worth the payoff.
And I would say the big problem is that many times, so long as you choose the cost and the payoff, mm-hmm. most of the time we're just head down in this, again for the men, be a monster, be a lion, be a warrior, and then you just set on that mentality, and then you're not even really evaluating what is the cost. Mm-hmm. You're only thinking about the potential payoff. And so we've talked about the decision-making process on other podcast episodes, so I don't want to necessarily go into this, but so long as you're entering into decisions at the highest level of clarity you can in this moment, knowing what you would predict the cost and the payoff to be, mm-hmm. and if it's aligned with your vision as well as your values, then you can choose the actions to move in that direction. Yeah. And if you do that, that's a better place to come from. Yeah. If you just set out on, here's how I'm going to be as a warrior, because here's what I want to achieve, and then you have no evaluation to what the cost is going to be, I think that puts you in a worse place.
Now, let me describe some of the costs that we're hearing from the partner's voice. And by the way, we are not trying to say this episode is blaming men for dynamics in the relationship. Next episode, we're going to talk about something that wives are struggling with inside, right? So there is always a role that both partners are playing to these dynamics. But some of the things we're hearing from wives related to this specific thing we're bringing up today is they observe their partner being quicker to anger. So they're saying, like, look, it seems like small things are really upsetting you. And you go quick from 0 to 60. You seem emotionally disengaged. Like what I said before, you're physically here, but I don't feel that you're emotionally or energetically present. Even when you're with me and the kids, it's great, but you seem kind of like in your head. You seem a little bit withdrawn. There's not as much of that joy, that spark. You seem displeased by little things. Not having a whole lot left over for the partnership. Or here's another dynamic. This might seem like the opposite end of the spectrum, but it can feel like they come home and because everything's been expended and maybe they're in that stress, that overwhelm, that emotional burden, their partner is showing up more passive, more agreeable, not taking initiative. And I don't think I made this point earlier, but I do feel it's really important with that messaging. And it's shifting, but there's still, and it's definitely been for the decades before, teaching men, and it starts with boys, to be strong and in a sense plow through your emotions. And I'm not sure if you probably noticed this too, Erin, but when we see different friends, both close friends and new acquaintances, and they have one boy, one girl child, I see completely different interactions, especially the father to the son versus the daughter. They're very different. And I get it. We're different, right? So there's going to be different coaching. I'm not saying it needs to be the same for both of the children, but there's still this messaging in a sense of like, don't be emotional. Don't, even don't be whiny. Don't be girly. And I think men, yes, they're going to handle emotions differently, but men still have emotional experiences. And the successful messaging and the drive and the be strong, we're seeing these men struggle with this. Honestly, I'm seeing them. They look sometimes depressed, really overwhelmed and stressed, sometimes even unhealthy. They're totally deprioritizing their health. And again, I think it's because it's like, keep going. And that's what they'll say sometimes is like, I'm doing all the things. I'm working hard. Don't you see? Not only outside the home, but when I'm home, I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm getting things done. And many women say, I see all that. I really do. I see what you do. But what's also important is how you're being. And that's a difference. What you're doing versus how you're being. What you're being is your attitude, your energy, how you're showing up as you do things. And that's also important. But again, I think because men aren't doing what we're going to get into, like what to be focusing on, that's what can happen.
Here's the big inner conflict because, even as you share, I'm thinking of my own experiences. And I know that some of the men listening, you're starting to feel some emotion because you can replay these experiences and these conversations that your spouse is even having with you. And it really can, in those moments, feel as if it's never enough. You don't appreciate me. You're overly criticizing me. Don't you see what I'm doing and putting forth for the family? And that's more of how the warrior sort of attack mentality gets brought back into the home. So it really does come down to often how men in this particular mentality are actually coping with stress, and then you can bring that home. We, of course, know through many studies that you have things like stress or emotional crossover, and that seems to get put on a partner. That causes more fear, concern, worry from an emotional standpoint. That causes the partner to react. That reaction, and we talk a lot about in our coaching, the conflict cycle of emotion and reaction. Now you're stuck in that cycle, and you're often going to defend your position of how much you're doing. So it really does come down to a lot about how you cope with that kind of stress, how you transition from that sort of outside world mentality of being a leader or being a man or being a warrior. And a lot of it can turn into negative habits when you're not dealing with coping with that appropriately. And sometimes we came up with 4 Ds, funny enough. Some negative coping habits could be drinking, devices, disengagement, and defensiveness.
Do you see yourself
now,
in
I
at
wanted to
least
put
one of
all
those?
4 of the Ds out there so you could remember, right? Drinking, devices, disengagement, and defensiveness. And we kind of already talked about the defensiveness because I could even feel it, right? I've had my own pattern of this show up because I feel as if how I'm trying to approach the world and create the life for our family and the energy that takes, I quickly get defensive with you, and I can feel what is not enough for me to be like, or actually to your point, doing all these things. Now I'm quick to get defensive, or as you mentioned, that's the reactive side. The repressive side is just disengagement.
Yeah.
You know what? If you're going to be disappointed, you're not going to appreciate what I'm doing, and I'm trying to attack the world and be this warrior, be a lion, not be a sheep, and you're going to have all these criticisms about me, like I just disengage. And maybe that goes to the devices and the drinking as well. So I can get quickly defensive with my outward reaction, or I can disengage, I can isolate, I can do my own thing. You further feel like you're not a priority.
Not loved.
Exactly. You're not loved. And then I get on my device to just disconnect, to try to recharge. Now I'm not paying attention to even my kids. I'm not helping around the house. And again, the justification is, well, don't you see all that I'm doing outside? So really it starts with the coping, and we need to have a way to intentionally transition from these different required ways of being, whether it be achievement out in the world versus the best way of being as a partner in the home.
I just want to outline one thing before we give the what to do instead, and we're going to make it crystal clear for you, is remember that at home, the experience that I think most of us, both men and women, are seeking is that it is a place of harmony, of replenishment, of love, of understanding, of partnership, of just nice experiences together. That doesn't mean that there's still management to do and, conflicts are going to occur. But remember, that's the home experience. That's the partnership. We want to come back together and fill each other up and remind each other that we are loved. We are wanted. We are appreciated, right? It's like we go out in the world, we're giving, we're doing. And it's like, come back and we want to be like, oh, here's my person who reminds me everything's going to be okay. And they love me and they see me and this is all worth it. So again, remember, that's the goal of home environment. Fill each other up, be loved. Remember, it all matters.
Individual rejuvenation.
Yes. So with that as the goal, what we all want, then if we want to fill that gap, how do we then transition? And first it starts with intention. And I know that may seem so simple, but most people are not being intentional. They're not intentionally shifting their mindset from go mode to home mode. Mm-hmm. And that could look like driving. And
that's the mentality, and not to cut you off there, but that's the mentality that shifts over because it's attack, never quit, never give up, go for it, rush through, push forward, push on, and you also have to think like, what's the impact on the nervous system there? So even for me, like I want to live in a conscious and supportive mentality in both these, right? Because I do want to achieve and have a contribution to the broader society and marriage, which is obviously what we do. And I want to hold this commitment and stand for my own values and for our family out in the world. And so it's not an either or. So to your point, yes, this intentional transition back, and I think it really starts with men realizing that it's so important that in this intentional transition to know that I do need to reflect on my experiences. I need to reflect and process the emotions and the experiences I'm having out in the world, even as I approach it with this warrior mentality, before I just bring it home. Like, how did that go? What am I going through? What showed up? Are there, I know you're going to say this isn't my favorite, but like, what's my inner child wounding? What's my trauma? Is this coming? Am I acting from fear? Is there something that I'm not dealing with for myself?
Yes.
So all of those kind of reflections and contemplations, I think are largely missing. Because
what we can't do is keep just saying, I'm stressed, I'm overwhelmed. And this goes for both partners, because I know all of us can get stressed, overwhelmed, be in that go mode, feel like there's an endless amount to do. We can't keep just saying, I'm stressed, okay, sorry. And then tomorrow, same. So processing is really important, and it's not emphasized enough in our culture, but processing can look like talking to a friend and not just like, oh, how you doing, man, or, oh, I'm busy, so much going on. That's not processing.
My spouse doesn't support me at all. It's not like a complaint fest either.
It's not being real. So if you have a friend that you can meet up with and be like, hey, I got to talk to you. Like, I don't know why, but I'm like really struggling to handle the amount of stress that I'm under, and I put so much pressure. That could be talking to a coach. There are like performance coaches, mindset coaches, there's therapists, there's psychologists. So it could be any one of those things if you can't do it on your own, because that's what's powerful about having this outside person who's good at asking questions, who's going to look at things from another perspective, is it helps us process. Because what we said is you can't just power through. That is not being an intentional person who is lined up with their goal in life of what we already described, what home life is like. So if you're dealing with something, especially related to this topic, have a way and a person to process it. Next would be to reevaluate your vision and why you're doing everything that you're doing. Like, are you still on track with what you want in life? Or have you been just going through the motions because you're like, oh, well, the next step was to climb the ladder, so to get another role, to get a higher raise. And that's just what I was told you do. But maybe that's not actually aligned with your vision.
Here is the big place I see doesn't get addressed. When you listen to these motivational videos and as they keep going, it actually doesn't align with the practical and the actual decision-making process. You never get on a particular path without evaluating the effectiveness of the actions and the decisions that you've made, and then course correct and adjust. Now, from all that you can glean from every successful person ever, if you deviate to a different path too frequently, well, then you're never really going to achieve that vision. Mm-hmm. But all visions, they never turn out the way they start. The way you think from the beginning, it's never going to be a straight line path. So I think largely what's missing in this warrior mentality, might as well just keep it more simple to that, is that you don't give, as we've already stated, the opportunity to reflect on your own emotional experience. Is this still aligned? How effective have my actions been? And what slight adjustments do I need to make while I'm still wanting to stay on path to the larger vision? It doesn't necessarily account for, again, the evaluation, the adjustments that is required for any kind of achievement.
Yeah. Yes. So then lastly, if that's not all enough, because we've given a lot here, it'd be cleaning up your integrity and getting realigned in the areas of life that are most important to you. And we would hope that listening to this podcast and hearing this, you see that your marriage needs to be a top priority. It's hard to put things into order, right? Like, which really goes first, kids or work or partner? It's like one doesn't truly have to be at the top because they can coexist. Now, you might need to simplify your life. You might have your hand in too many buckets and too many places, but your marriage, your partnership needs to be a priority. And I promise you that when it is and your foundation is strong, you are more powerful in life. You are more effective in your work. You know that, right? Because you know that when you just had an argument, you're less clear. You're not as creative at work. You are more down. And so making your marriage a priority is possible even when you have all these responsibilities. And if you're like, okay, Freemans, but it feels hard and I forget and I get caught up in all the things to do, that's why we created our 30-day couples challenges. And we have 2 of them. We have 2 different levels. So we have the level 1, prioritizing us, which focuses on your communication, your connection, filling your love accounts, right? Because we talked about you want to be filling each other up. You want to remind each other that you're loved and appreciated. So we give you fun, simple ways to do that. Again, no matter how busy you are. So that's the level 1, prioritizing us challenge. And then we have our level 2, rebuilding us. This would be best if you're really coming out of a harder season in marriage and there's some underlying repair and rebuilding work to do. We go into things like, what does repair really look like? Emotional intelligence topics, what the needle movers are for both of you, meaning what you both really need in the partnership, and so much more. We don't want to spoil that, but both are truly powerful. Most couples end up doing both just because they really like the daily topics, but go to the links in the show notes to sign up for the next one. When you're hearing this episode, it will likely be within days. We start it on the 1st of the month. So the 2 links, if you want to type it into your URL, it is mycoupleschallenge.com and mycoupleschallenge.com/rebuilding. But we will link both of those in the show notes. You just absolutely must do them because you'll see why over 32,000 couples have loved these prompts, and it makes sure you don't forget about this and just get motivated for a day. It's like you consistently focus on it and you'll feel the difference in your partnership.
And to close this out, it really does come down to how you communicate with your partner and the agreements, the standards that you set, which can also be time-based for you to come back to and evaluate. So hopefully that makes sense. That's coming from my mind because that's how I'm seeing this whole thing unfold. So what that means more practically is, there's going to be times where if the two of you and your partner, can come together and really define what your vision is, what your values are, what those standards are, you understand what you each need, then you could say, I realize, this is now me talking as a husband, I realize this season, if we're really going to work towards this vision, that I'm going to need to grind. And I see that that's what I'm going to have to do. And so if I grind, the payoff is that we're going to be able to live this life. The cost is going to be, and now you're just open with your partner. I see the cost is probably going to be time. The cost is going to be, in more of a traditional sense, if I am out in the world, that maybe you take on some of the more responsibilities with parenting or the home. Now, look, we're not putting you in any sort of category that this has to be this way. I want you to take away the principle of how you communicate about your vision and values and what you're each going to need for this time-bound season. Hey, I'm gonna grind for 2 months. I'm probably not going to have as much time at home. Does that work for you? Does that feel that if and when that pays off, that time to sacrifice around responsibility and time would be worth it? And then you can say to me, that does feel worth it. And my needs are going to be X, Y, Z. That when you are home, if it's going to be a short period of time, that you're now not letting that leak into the family. You're not on your phone. You're not on your device. Have your time to transition. When you're being here, be here loving, right? So you, as a partner, get to share what you're going to need if you're going to allow for the sacrifice that's needed so that your needs are maintained to a certain standard level of care.
I love what you said, though, that sacrifice would ideally be short seasons, right? It can't be persistent years and years of sacrifice.
Oh, yeah. And that's part of the agreement would be, and we're going to come back literally in 2 months, put it on the calendar right now, 2-3 months, and let's evaluate. Like, that's a key part of all this. Like, it's not a straight line path. We're going to have to pause together, evaluate, have I been maintaining my standard, number one? Have I been able to show up in the ways that you needed, even if more limited? And am I maintaining my own standard of integrity around this, or have I slipped on that? So if we can evaluate that together in, say, 3 months, then we can decide if that path is going to be the one that we continue on or we need to make adjustment.
And that's why it's so important that you really strengthen your communication and that you can feel connected even through these seasons where you are focused on many other things, because it's going to happen. We've been through many of them ourselves. And that's, again, why I just really want you to do one of the challenges, because I want to prove to you that no matter how busy that you are, no matter how much you have going on, you can still in little ways make your relationship, make loving each other a priority every day. And so just go read the testimonials. Pick one of the challenges to start with, either the level 1 or the level 2. We can't wait for you. Again, it'll be starting within days of hearing this episode. So with that, we know there's a lot of new listeners. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can hear past and future episodes. And it also helps us a lot if you give us a rating on whichever platform that you're listening on. If you want more couples to be able to hear this, go ahead and hit the 5 stars, because we try to add value to all of you. But with that, we love you guys, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.